We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. I'll call this meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order for November 21st, 2022. And again, we are meeting in hybrid version, both in person here as well as remotely via Teams this week. So thanks everyone for joining us. We'll start with our Pledge of Allegiance. Wendy, do you want to lead us tonight? Thank you, Wendy. We will move on to communications from the public. We do have 3 public hearings advertised for this evening, but if you're here to bring anything to the attention of the council, now would be your opportunity, and your name and address for the record, please, when you approach the dais. Any comments this evening? Mary.
Good evening. Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead, and I'm told our address is 137 rather than 135, so okay. I'll correct the record on that. And I am here tonight to, I sent, and you should have gotten in your packet, a petition that we circulated. And I wanted to just frame this in the sense that I think one of the takeaway messages from me from reaching out in this manner to the public is that the public sees Whitefish as a leader in the community and is really looking to you to help find some new solutions that can help us look at ways to not only address the concerns that Whitefish has, but these are issues that are repeated in other communities in the valley, and we can all learn and grow from your getting it right. And so I take this petition as an encouragement, not only from quite a few residents in Whitefish, but from visitors and from folks in Columbia Falls and Kalispell who really see our highway corridors as the entrance to our communities and something that we still have the opportunity to get right. And so I encourage you to accept this in that spirit and to hopefully really look at the opportunity that I think is there for you to try something new. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Just a reminder to the audience that item 6A of the agenda, the public hearing, is closed. If you'd like to speak to this item, now would be your only opportunity. Michelle, anyone online wishing to comment this evening? By chance?
Those of you who are attending via Teams, if you'd like to speak and address the council at this time regarding anything that's on the agenda that's not a public hearing, please raise your hand or unmute your mic. Looks like we're good. Thanks,
Michelle. We'll stay with the audience. Any volunteer board reports tonight from the audience? Volunteer boards? How about the council? Steve?
Yep, the planning board met on Thursday last week, and I just want to report that at long last, the council will see the snow lot project that was approved unanimously by the planning board on Thursday. So I do believe that's on our December 5th agenda.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Further reports? Andy? That gets no debate. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Just a reminder to turn the mic on, Andy.
Oh, sorry. And
Mr.
Mayor, I would then move that item back to the table.
And where would you like that to show on the agenda if you do get a second?
After the consent agenda.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion? Second. Seconded by Counselor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign. I will place that at the, just before item 6, after our adoption of the consent agenda. Further volunteer board reports from the council. Not seeing any, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Before we motion, you do have the November 7th special as well as regular meeting minutes included in the packet, and I would like to congratulate Austin Hicks, who will have the recommendation from our police chief for confirmation as a police officer, passing his probationary period. So congratulations. Motion?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Councilor Quinnell. Further discussion? Please.
Can I add corrections even if I wasn't here?
Yes.
Okay. So on our special agenda, it just said Don Herring, but it didn't list what board he was assigned to. So I think we should put in there the Whitefish Lake and Lakeshore Protection Committee, just so people know which one. And then under the minutes, on page 37, where Nathan is talking, it should read works. And then under the second paragraph, it should just read WANTS without the apostrophe. So that's all that I found. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Further discussion on the consent agenda? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously as well, which brings us quickly. Andy, discussion.
I would make a motion.
Please.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we approve ordinance, which will be now our 22-16 on a first reading, and that is adding a new Chapter 18 to Title II of the Whitefish City Code to establish the Whitefish Sustainable Tourism Master Plan Standing Committee.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Andy, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, and I'll keep my comments relatively brief. I think I made most of them, although we do have 2 members that were not with us 2 weeks ago. I think there's some redundancy in this committee. I'll be very honest about that. And if I were to go ahead and get the whiteboard out and put a list of actionable items on there that have come out of that committee to date, I probably couldn't do that for you right now. That said, I do think the committee has a function, and kind of one of my thoughts with the committee, and I've talked with the committee chair, Mr. Schott, who's been chairing that committee, is we do have a good broad group of people from throughout the community representing the mountain and the WCBB and obviously the city and the chamber, and I think it's a group that doesn't normally get together and deal with which, quite frankly, is one of the largest elephants in our room, and that is tourism. And I think my hope by keeping this committee going, because there's a fair amount of overlap with the Climate Action Committee, and my kind of hope would be that over a year's time, or maybe 2, that this committee could potentially go away and we could meld both those committees into what is an overall standing committee that deals with sustainability as a whole and at large, because I think the 2 are very related, because a lot of the things that we talk about in the Sustainable Tourism Master Plan Committee are things that are in the Climate Action Plan. So I think there's a good crossover there, and I think that those 2 committees can come together. I don't think that that can happen right away. I know that Dana and Craig and Michelle were not the biggest fans of this, and I can understand why, but I'm not that concerned about it from staff's perspective, because it doesn't take a ton of staff time. And if it was something that did take a lot of staff time, I mean, we keep our own minutes for the most part, and it's, you know, we don't meet that often, and I just think that it's something that this community needs, and I'm hoping that with a little bit of permanency, it can find its way and get on its feet, and we can make some differences. So that's my pitch, and that's it.
Thanks, Andy. Further discussion on the motion?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I would also endorse this because I think it's important, given the nature of this particular issue, that we have a standing committee, think about it in particular. Yes, there's some overlap with climate action, but this is, as we all know, and we've all discussed, for every member of this community, and it makes our lives better for every member of this community as a result of it. Having a group, particularly of this ilk, to address and keep our attention on these issues and to be charged with the idea of keep bringing us ideas. We want ideas on how we better manage this thing, I think is a very good thing. So I'm really very hopeful that we'll pass this and make it a standing committee.
Further comments on the motion? Rebecca?
I'm sorry I wasn't here, but I loved this plan, and I think it does kind of go out into all different areas of our city, and I don't think anything is actually as important as the goal of this committee, which is to help us become good stewards and also maintain our town's livability and plan for climate change. So I'm very supportive of keeping the committee going because the staff doesn't think it's burdensome to meet every 2 months, and they seem highly motivated to come up with real solutions.
Thanks, Rebecca. Further discussion on the motion? Again, this would be ordinance, or will be ordinance 22-16, establishing the Sustainable Tourism Master Plan as a standing city committee. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does pass on a 5-1 vote with Councilor Caltabiano voting in opposition. We will move on to item 6A of our agenda, which will be ordinance number 22-17, an ordinance amending the Whitefish City Code to add Article Y, Chapter 2, Title 11, to establish the WBT zoning district, which, as you know, is our business transitional district, as an implementation of the Highway 93 South corridor plan. This is on a first reading. It was postponed from our November 7th meeting, and the public hearing does remain closed. Dave.
Just give you a kind of a brief summary again. Just, obviously it's something that we've been working on. Started with the Highway 93 corridor plan steering committee about 3 years ago now, and going through that process and with that plan, and then I think it came to the planning board about a year ago, adopting this as an implementation item of our 93 South Corridor Plan. The whole point of that transitional zone is that the existing zoning is County B4, which is very similar to our existing WB2 zone, allowing a range of retail and high traffic uses. And one of the things that the corridor plan came up with is that the last thing that we wanted south of 40 was high traffic and congestion uses, and so we came up with a transitional zone that replaced and removed the high traffic types of uses out of that zoning district. It did keep professional offices in there, light industrial, and housing by right, and that's really the only uses that are permitted. There's a few conditional uses that are added in there too. So some of the concern about this zone is that it should prevent sprawl, limit traffic and congestion, and provide housing, and that's one of the goals of this particular zoning, is it does limit sprawl and traffic by reducing the number of uses that are permitted there to ones that aren't high traffic uses, and it does permit residential uses. And currently residential is not allowed in that county B4 zone that's existing, but it does allow other things like hotels and gas stations and car dealerships and mini storage facilities, which are things that I don't think any of us want south of Highway 40. So this transitional zone would give an opportunity to have a zoning district that does limit those things. Another concern was that it needs to address traffic issues, infrastructure needs, as well as landscaping and setbacks and building forums. And again, this district requires frontage and backage roads for any development out there. It requires consolidation of highway access points. Currently, there's no requirement for those things under the county, and our B2 zone doesn't have any of those requirements. Our B2 is our equivalent zoning, which we gave to Town Pump, and I think anybody that might want to annex in any of those 4 or 5 parcels that are out there, including the ones that are actually north of Highway 40 that are Zone B4, would expect WB2 zoning, because that's what we've given to other properties that have annexed. But we have a landscaping setback of 50 feet off the highway. On your desk, Rebecca asked me to put together a drawing that shows what the width of the highway is. It's between 210 feet and 275 feet wide along there. So with that additional 50-foot setback, that's going to be required to be landscaped. That would be a significant landscaping buffer between the typical highway width of 5 lanes is only 60 feet. So anything outside of that, it's almost like 100 feet on either side of vegetative buffer, plus another 50 feet that would be required. The stone also has a 20-foot setback requirement when it's adjacent to residential property. And so any residential to the back or the side of any of the types of uses that might go in there would have a 20-foot setback. And once again, with the limit of 7,500 square feet for building size, that will limit any kind of strip mall or strip development. Anything would have to come to the city council for review. Basically gives you guys, as the city, the right to have a complete oversight over any kind of development that would happen in that strip that's currently zoned B4. Right now, we have absolutely no say in what happens because it's all in the county. They have minimal standards, but we'd also have our opportunity to apply our non-residential and multifamily development standards, as well as our architectural review standards, dark sky standards, our sign ordinance, as well as our environmental regulations to anything that develops out there. And so it's because of those things, and because it's an implementation item of the growth policy, staff continues to recommend approval.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave on his staff report? Steve?
Dave, I asked this question at our last meeting because it still confuses me. If somebody annexes in, we approve their annexation, they choose one of these by right purposes or one of these by right building permitted uses, how do we require them to build a frontage and backage road?
Well, it's a requirement of the zoning that it says shared driveway access or frontage roads are required where possible to provide a cohesive internal circulation.
So does it happen at site plan? Does it happen at building permit time? I mean,
Well, it'd be,
where possible?
once they
just leave
submit
it.
a building permit, I mean, if it's a bigger development, I mean, if it's something small on a little lot, if something subdivides, it depends on what's around them. If there's an opportunity to do a frontage road, if someone does a subdivision, if someone has a bigger project that requires a conditional use permit, I mean, obviously we would apply it then if this is a use by right, because currently those lots are very large. For instance, if the, that boat dealership, for instance.
Hang on, let me finish. Hang on just a second. You just said if it's a conditional use permit, I get that. But where are the teeth that we have to say anybody who annexes in has to start providing frontage and backage roads? Because where possible does not mean they have to do it if it's not possible.
Well, just like we do with our, Baker Avenue, we have that in our, transportation plan.
We don't have anything
We
that
can
shows
require
frontage and
easements,
backage
or we
roads.
can try to obtain easements from people for future development, like we did with the Dalen property, but, we can't really get someone to build something unless it's a use by right. So, you can't force them to build it, but we can, try to get an easement for the future connection out of them if it's a building permit.
Okay, those are a lot of ifs. That's not a requirement, though. I mean, that's my point, is that I get what we want to do, but we don't have a map that shows these frontage and backage roads where we would like them to go, so we can actually hold them to, hey, this is the plan, you can't build in this part because we have this line
That's one of the
drawn
steps that
here.
we need to develop. I think Craig mentioned at the last meeting that we might have an opportunity to update our transportation plan to look specifically at this area. I know the county, when they did their South Whitefish Corridor plan, put some lines on the map that kind of showed vaguely where a frontage or backage road might go on the west side. The east side of it is pretty narrow, so there's not a whole lot of room for a frontage or backage road, but it depends on how, if it's a big enough lot, it's going to have some circulation in there, which we'd require them to provide that, and that's part of our non-residential development standards as well, is that you can't have
That's
parking up front, so.
I mean, that's my heartburn, that's the general public's heartburn, is that we're allowing these permitted uses. If we adopt this, and then we let people annex in, they can pick one of those permitted uses, but we can't really,
Well,
let me finish.
Okay.
There's nothing in here that says that we can get frontage and backage roads out of those. And I think that's part of that for me, that's part of my heartburn, and I think that's what other people, when we're hearing, opposition to this, that's where some of that comes from.
Well,
So-
all you guys would need to change is that word that says where possible, and just take that out and say they're required. Right now it says where possible. That's the only reason it's an if in there. If you take out the where possible and to make it required, it's not any different than the parking requirements that we absolutely make them make. But that's the only if, is it talks about it where possible, because there's some situations where you're not going to be able to do it, right? That's why that says where possible. But
Okay. My other question is, and this is the one that I think a lot of us have, and a lot of people that I've talked to have, is that, so, you know, we've come up with these ideas that of the kinds of businesses we'd like to see out there, but somebody that owns property out there can look at that list and say, I don't want to do any of those, and they're in the county. Is there anything that prevents them from doing one of the county B4, WB, or whatever their zoning is called, B4? Is there anything that we can do to prevent them from choosing one of the permitted uses in the county, in the B4 zone?
not if it's not in the city.
Okay, so even if we pass this and they decide that they want to do one of those B4 permitted uses, we have no control over that at all, correct?
Yeah, I mean, right now, again, you know, they don't really have much incentive to annex anyway, but without, you know, if they thought they could get B2, I'm sure they would have been here a long time ago wanting to annex.
So it's interesting that you bring up this idea of incentivizing people to annex, and I understand that we want them to annex so we can have control over what they do. And at the same time, the incentives to annex are a lot of business uses that, quite frankly, look kind of like sprawl to me, either permitted or conditional uses. You know, when I drive through the outskirts of any town anywhere, the first thing you come through are all the business parks, and then you finally get to the downtown. And it looks like that's what, to me, in particular, that's kind of what it looks like here, and I don't think that we have the public's support of that. I'm editorializing right now, so I'll stop. But I just want to make sure that I'm not missing something, that, you know, even if we adopt this, somebody that has county property, they can build whatever the county allows them to build, and we have no say, as long as they can get the permit from the county, correct?
No, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Who's next? Ben?
Dalen brought up the concern at our last meeting that this zoning district is effectively the highest density residential district in town. And I'm still having heartburn about it, just from the fact that it's just doesn't seem like great planning approach to me. And so I was wondering if there was support to reduce the density and intensity of the residential uses in this district. Like, for example, if I thought it should be middle density and below, what would be the best way to motion that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think when this thing first came to you guys, it was had less residential uses, and then just out of the work sessions, you guys seem to want residential there, so we upped it to 18 units as a use by right. You can look at, you know, right now it says permitted uses, single family through multifamily, 1 to 18 units is a permitted use. If you wanted to reduce that to 1 to 8 or 1 to 4, and then in the conditional uses, then, you know, the remainder of them, you know, right now it says multifamily, you know, 19 units or more is a conditional use. So you could, you know, if you wanted to go to 4 units as a use by right and make it, you know, 5 and above as a conditional use, I mean, that would be a simple change.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca, did you have anything?
So I wanted to ask Craig about how long it would take to do, if we amended the transportation plan and analyzed this area, and it would come through the Public Works, or would we need to hire a traffic engineer to do that kind of analysis, where we'd look at entrance and egress onto Highway 93 and trying to line things up in frontage roads and drainage and things like that? Because when Dave created this, and I don't know if you have this for the public to look at, Dave, but when he created this map, a lot of the buffer area is actually where the water drains through there on the west side. So I don't even know if that's buildable space. But I was wondering if we were to undertake that as a city, how would that happen? How long would it take? Because people are wanting it sounds like people want us to get some of this analysis done before we approve the use.
So I think one of the things we need to keep in mind is that Highway 93 is not a city right-of-way. You know, we've looked at it through the existing transportation plan and the update that we just recently approved, but the city doesn't have ultimate authority or jurisdiction over this highway, and so to take it much further could be a relatively futile effort because we don't have the right to approve or deny future access onto Highway 93 or Highway 40. I can tell you that MDT is working on an access management plan. They have hired a consultant, and they are moving forward with an access management plan from Kalispell all the way to, I believe, Mountainside. It's going all the way through Whitefish to 93 West. And so that process has already begun. They've gone through the RFP, they've hired a consultant, and they're just working on finalizing a scope to get that contract in place. And so, you know, the city and the public will be involved in that process, and I think more prudent use of our time would be to focus on that particular effort that's already underway than to try and, you know, amend a transportation plan that we just recently amended. I'm not saying that in the future we shouldn't at some point have some type of an appendix or an amendment to our transportation plan that memorializes what MDT is working on, but that's the process that I think is the most rapid and will get us to this point quicker.
Okay, thank you. When I
And
said,
just real quickly, I'm
sure.
looking at this map. I think that while the, you know, the distances shown and the scale on this map is accurate, we need to realize that this is based on county cadastral lines. And so, you know, although this, you know, water, I don't even know if it's necessarily a drainage way, but these lines aren't exactly, I mean, I think that the highway is more centered within the right-of-way than is shown on this map. But this is the most accurate data we can get from the county. They're working on trying to fix some of this stuff, but you're right, there's likely some conveyance that happens in the right-of-way, but it's more likely partially in the right-of-way and partially on private property.
okay, thank you. And then Dave, Mary Flowers from Citizens brought up a type of zoning. Could you just explain to the public why we wouldn't wait on a decision on this to implement that type of zoning out here and how we do that in the city? Use versus, what was it called?
So, yeah, she brought up form-based codes, which kind of started in the 90s, was kind of a zoning, planning and zoning trend nationwide. A few cities adopted pure form-based codes. Some of them adopted hybrid form-based codes. And basically, form-based looks more at the building design and the street frontage and how it interacts with pedestrians and traffic rather than specific uses in a district. And so they might allow a general type of uses like commercial without specifically identifying what types of retail or what types of uses would be permitted. Our existing code, the other type of code, which was the kind of the original zoning codes nationwide, is Euclidean zoning, where it's basically separating types of uses. You want your industrial over here and you want your residential far away from that, and mixing, you know, and ours was based on a Euclidean form, but over the, you know, probably the last 10 or 15 years, we've added more and more form-based elements to our code. Our architectural review standards have form-based elements. We have specific standards for non-residential uses, multifamily uses that add form-based elements. And so, and then we've added other stuff to the zoning code that deals with form-based things, and a lot of it's very specific to the types of buildings that we want to see, again, with our architectural review standards. So we already have that in some sense. I mean, there's some other aspects of that we could look at. I know that when we do our growth policy, we may be looking a little bit more implementation of our downtown master plan items, which looks at possibly some more form-based stuff in the downtown that we might be able to overlay off some of the residential neighborhoods that surround downtown. But it's not generally something you just apply to one specific area unless you're going to you have a vision for it. It's much more of an urban style zoning where you're really looking at downtown core in a mixed use environment. And, so I mean, that's something that I think that we would get the same results with our existing zoning than we would anyway, so.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Andy?
This is a Craig question, actually. Because and obviously the intersection of 93 and 40 is of concern to a lot of people, and it's the one that all the properties in that three-corner area now, not the northeast, obviously. My question is, now that we have utilities within essentially 200 feet of those large lots, of those large properties, would those properties be dividable, and would they be permittable for septic with utilities less than 200 feet away? And they are now included in our urban growth boundary?
Yeah, the county septic rules have an exclusion for the price of a project. And so if they can prove that septic can be installed for, I can't remember, it's 2 times or 3 times the cost of the water main or sewer main extension, then the county will grant that variance. There is a rule in the county septic code that requires connection within 200 feet, but if you can do a cost estimate that shows the cost to extend services, I think it's more than 3 times the cost to connect to city services, then there's a variance for it.
Just out of curiosity, for something that would require, a larger density and obviously an engineered system of some variety, seems to me it would probably be cheaper to run a pipe for 150 or 200 feet. Seems to me that would be a tough argument to make.
Well, it depends. The cost to bore and jack beneath state highways gets pretty expensive, and so that's where ultimately you'd have to come up with the actual design and what the distance is and how much boring and jacking you're doing to get under the highway.
My wife, just having done that over in Columbia Falls under Nucleus Avenue, I can tell you that that is a correct statement. It's expensive to bore under a state highway.
Yeah.
Further questions for staff? Frank?
Dave, I know that we've asked you to work on this and go back to it. I continue to have arguments with myself as to the efficacy of our doing anything. I can see that we really don't want commercial development out there of any kind. We would prefer other things. And yet, if we do this, we are somehow incenting exactly that commercial development that we don't want. It might be an acceptable use, but that's what we're doing. Under no circumstances, or virtually none, I can think of any commercial use that would go out there, why they would need or want city services, or to be bothered with paying city taxes, or to be bothered with paying resort tax on their sales. And so the likelihood of a commercial development coming into our, voluntarily annexing into our city is so remote I can't hardly, as a business analysis, you'd say, what are we talking about here? At the same time, I have everybody that is complaining about this one way or the other thinks that if we zone it, it will come. And that isn't true either. Under no circumstances can we really control what goes on out there. And I think everybody in this room and in this city needs to understand that. I, quite frankly, cannot bring myself to support this at this time because I don't think it solves any problems. And it incents the kinds of things that, if we really ask ourselves, do we want to incent those things out there under any circumstances? The answer is no, I really don't think I want to. And so by doing something like this, I kind of view it as, why would I incent things that I really don't want? Why would I facilitate things that I really don't want? If they're going to come, they're going to come anyway. And so I guess I don't want to frustrate you anymore, but I just can't bring myself under these circumstances, the way this is it's not even the way it's drafted, Dave. It's the concept that we're going to issue some zoning and have some control is just a total falsehood. And, you know, I appreciate all the comments and recommendations that we've got for, oh, let's work with the county. Well, how long have we been trying to work with the county on this? And how much space have we gotten? Zero. And I don't see that it's going to change. I mean, I've looked at it, and I'll ask again, but I just don't see that happen. I think there are some other alternatives that might be out there in terms of conditional zoning or some other things that we ought to think about or look at. And again, given what I see here, I just can't support it. So anyway, thanks. That's all I got.
Thanks, Frank. Further questions or comments for staff? Well, one way or another, I'd entertain a motion either up or down on this item, just so we can move the meeting agenda forward. Rebecca.
I know this has been controversial, but I'll make a motion to approve if I get a second.
And that would be approve ordinance 22-17.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Is there a second to the motion?
Second it for the sake of discussion.
Seconded by Councilor Quinnell. Rebecca, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, this has been really difficult and very confusing, I think, for us as well as the public. And I did sit in on many city council meetings where we actually, not as a councilor, but in the audience, where we would try to reach out to the county. This went on for years, maybe 4 or 5 times, where we tried to initiate cooperation between the city and the county to design this area. And there were, I think, backroom deals to block that by people that owned property in the corridor. And so it never happened. And so I also sat through the county corridor planning that is now in place, as did our planning director. And so there is a corridor plan farther down that the citizens that own property out there worked on pretty hard for a while, that has some loose frontage areas and discussions about lining up roads so there could be lights and traffic control and things like that. Buffers were discussed, and so I'm supporting this because I think we need to step forward. I think the benefits of doing it actually are for the city that we can control lights, our water quality standards. We have traffic. We can analyze traffic patterns. We have buffers to protect the neighborhoods. And I do think commercial is going to happen down there because it's already got commercial going on down there. The reason primarily why I'm supportive of moving forward with it now is that we need housing desperately, and I don't think it's too far out from the schools or downtown for people to live there and come into town. It's very difficult to build within our city limits because of existing neighborhoods. And so I think we need to kind of move things forward. I understand the reluctance to do so, though.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a friendly amendment to the motion if possible.
Please do.
I would move that we move all the permitted uses under section 11.2Y-2 to move them all to conditional uses.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Steve, would you like to speak to your motion? Again, that's to move all permitted uses outlined in section 11-Y-2 from a permitted use category to a conditional use permit.
Yeah, it helps me deal with the heartburn a little more, knowing that people can come in and petition to annex us, to annex into the city, but they can't do anything out there unless it comes back to the council with a plan, that they can't, that way, if it's a conditional use, we can require them to set aside easements for frontage roads, we can require all kinds of things that we can't do under a permitted use. So that's the reason for my motion. It gives us much more control once they annex in, because our annexation policy does not allow us to have those kind of conditions, our current annexation policy.
Thank you, Steve. Further comments on the friendly amendment? Ben?
Could I ask the planning director to comment on that?
Yeah, just the only thing I would note is there's a couple things in there that we, like home occupations are a permitted use. We see a lot of people have home businesses. They have to get a business license if they're in the city. We get a lot of those every month. It'd be very onerous to make them come through for a conditional use permit. You know, I would also make an argument for daycares and daycare centers, because there's something that's really needed in the community. To make it difficult for them to operate would be difficult. And then the two things on publicly utility buildings and publicly owned and operated buildings are typically permitted in all zones. And that's just stuff that we might need out there for infrastructure. Other than that, yeah, that's my only comment.
Further comment on the amendment? Is everyone clear with the friendly amendment? Again, that would be moving all permitted uses outlined in section 11-Y-2 from permitted use to a conditional use category. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Sure.
If we wanted to exclude daycares, home occupations, and public utility sites, where would we put that language?
That's not
in?
my motion.
Oh, okay.
All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry on a 5-1 vote with Councilor Caltabiano voting in opposition, which brings us back to the original motion. Further discussion. Frank?
Rebecca,
Microphone.
Rebecca, I appreciate your comments. I want to clarify one thing, and it's my problem with this whole routine. Even if we enact this zoning, please keep in mind that we will not have any control over the bulk of that area. We won't get to require traffic patterns. We won't be requiring setbacks because of the numbers of people that are not going to, and I appreciate, which I think you were saying, on those properties where they're going to annex in, we would have that control. But the way you said it presents a problem for the public, because you seem to say, and I know you know better, that if we do this, we'll get to control that. And we don't. I want to reiterate this again. Nothing in this zoning package can be required of anyone out there unless they're going to annex in. And so by putting this out there doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. Doesn't mean we're going to get to have control over any of it. I just want to set the expectations here for what we're really doing, because it's something that is really important for the public and for us all to understand as we move forward. Okay? Yeah. Thanks.
Ben? And then Steve?
We're commenting on the motion to pass, right?
Correct.
Yeah. This debate, which has been long and arduous, and it's been a tough one, and I think, in my mind, that circles back to the fact that the entire conversation is about what we don't want, not what we do want. And I look at this as a community member and I say, are we trying to really expand the city of Whitefish down south of Highway 40, as opposed to all the other directions that are much closer to the core and would be smarter development? And I to be honest, I mean, when this extension of services south of 40 came through, I believe I voted against it, because at that time I didn't understand why we wanted to do this, and I still don't. Now, with all of that said, there's all the arguments about, you know, what's going to happen anyway at the county and all that, and I get it. But again, the conversation goes back to what we don't want. So what do we want from commercial? I know for me, I'm adamant, I do not want sprawl. I don't think we should have commercial sprawl all the way down the highway down to Kalispell. Okay, well then it's about residential. And then I think about residential, and we have a proposal in front of us that's the highest density residential district in the community. And that's not good planning. It's not great for the folks that live there. They have to drive, all the way up the highway to get to a town. It's just bad planning. And so if it's not high density residential, then it's not sprawl, then what is it? It's low density commercial and it's low density residential. And guess what can be done in the county without being in the city is both of those things. And so, to be honest, Frank, I'm kind of with you. I mean, I know this is extremely frustrating that we've been gone this long with this thing, and I'm sure staff hates us for bringing this thing back 5 times or whatever we've done at this point. But I'm still not understanding what our goals are here. I mean, we have planning documents that say we're supposed to adopt something here. We don't have a clear vision for it. The whole conversation's about what we don't want. I think ultimately, I just think either we shouldn't pass it or we should pass it the way that Steve said, which is bring a site plan, we'll think about it. I don't know what else to do with it. So I'll go with it if it's conditional, but I wouldn't feel bad about voting against the thing entirely either. So, yeah, that's my comment.
Thanks, Ben. You kind of summed up my feelings about this. Really, the only reason that I seconded Rebecca's motion was to pull all those permitted uses out, even ones that maybe seem inconsiderate, like daycare centers and those kind of things. But still, if we want control over what's down there, then that's how we enact that control if people decide to try to annex into the city, given our current annexation policy. I still, if I pass this thing, it's going to be holding my nose. I'm still not convinced that I should vote for it in general. I don't know if the better plan would be to postpone to a date uncertain with this new version or not. I don't know when it's going to be any more palatable to discuss and pass. So I guess my thought is that given that we may have people who want to annex into the city, we're being told that at least we would have control. They would have to come back to us with another plan that we could vote on up or down. And I guess I can support it knowing that. And at the same time, I agree with everything you said, Ben, that feels like we're legislating against what we don't want rather than trying to provide a vision of what we do want.
Rebecca.
I think my first meeting on here, we had to deal with the town pump, and I was against that. And our standards turned it into a very nice-looking development, So I think that's the difference for me, is we've worked really hard to plan our town into something aesthetically beautiful with lots of public input. And so, and when I talked to the Emerald Heights neighborhood folks, they said they preferred that the city design standards and our dark skies ordinance and our water quality and all that stuff was much more preferable to them right next to their neighborhood than the county standards, which have very little compliance oversight. And so I guess for me, when I look at how we've grown our town, I actually trust our process more, especially next to an urban center like the city of Whitefish, more than just leaving it to the county standards, which we've seen down there, which most people don't really appreciate, the sprawl look. So that's one reason why I think we should proceed. I know it's really a hard decision, and I trust all of your opinions.
Frank?
Rebecca, and I apologize for doing this, I again want to emphasize that by passing this, we do not get to create what that corridor looks like. They
But you
not-
have an opportunity to affect the few properties that do petition to
That's
annex.
true, that's true,
So you can make an improvement,
if you say so. Yeah.
just my opinion.
Yeah. It is, it is. So,
Andy?
Yeah, just a few comments. I'll try and be brief, but I probably won't be. I think the reason we're having a hard time is the reason we get the letters, and it's a very, very difficult equation to solve, unfortunately, and it has been for a very, very long time, and it's been out there for 30 or 40 years, whether we extend services beyond or what happens. But as we've seen, growth of the commercial corridor from the north to the south and the south to the north both, and eventually, unfortunately, we're going to see more and more of it, I'm afraid. And to Frank's argument, he is correct in that we're probably not going to control a lot of commercial development unless that commercial development has a lot of toilets. That's the reality. Because if it doesn't have a lot of toilets, they're going to put a septic tank in, and they're going to be outside the city limits and not pay city taxes, and they're going to be outside the city limits so they don't pay resort tax. We know that to be a fact. We've met with Mr. Wells, and he ain't going to do it. Why? He's not going to annex because he would have to pay resort tax on his boats because, as Dana said, they're not necessary transportation. There's no islands in Whitefish Lake. So from the commercial aspect, which I find interesting in all the letters we get, it's like, oh, you're going to just make a commercial strip out there. It's like, no, that can happen whether we do anything or not. So what then happens is we're going to see things with a lot of density. So if it's a commercial development that's got a lot of toilets, that's going to be a hotel. That's who's going to come to us for a sewer extension and annexation. So I think that's something we need to be cognizant of. And part of the other problem is because those properties are on the highway and are sold as commercial properties, and as soon as we add 18-unit housing densities to them and everything, the values of those properties are going to go up even more, which is going to make what goes on there even denser. That's the reality of that. I think we need to understand that. Yes, we'll have some control over it when it happens, and I think by moving everything to a conditioned use, that helps, but the tool that we don't have in our arsenal, and this is really sad, and this is a state problem, this is not a municipal problem, is we don't have conditioned annexation. If we had conditioned annexation, we would be in the driver's seat. Then we could say, you get a pipe when we get something we like, period. And I don't know, and this is my question for Dave, if something came through, it would come through as an annexation first, then as a conditioned use application if we were to pass it as amended currently, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the zoning has to be adopted and in place before we know what the development rights are.
Right,
'Cause,
right.
when they come to us, it's a county zoning. Depending on what zoning that they ask for or what zoning the council approves as part of that annexation. And we talked about that when we talked about our annexation policy, is whether those things come through together so that the annexation and the zoning happens at the same time. So there's some assurance at the council what's going to happen there.
So,
Because in the past, you guys have agreed to annex something, then the zoning came later, right? And that's been our old policy, but yeah.
so Dave, that is one part of my question and may influence how I look at my vote here. Where are we at with, I know we're working on annexation policy currently, but how far out are we on that?
I think that's something that we can probably have a work session with the council on, and just, having some staff turnover and stuff, it kind of got set on the back burner a little bit this summer, but with all the stuff that we had going on, but yeah, we're definitely something that we can bring back. And I mean, you guys gave us specific direction. You wanted it to look like how Missoula does it, and so I think that's the direction that we got from you, and that's what we were planning on coming back with you with the work session.
Okay. And I know Bozeman is currently looking at some different models, but again, we're hamstrung in large part by state legislation, and I think Bozeman's going to try some things, as I understand, that are a little out of the box and potentially not survivable in court, but I think I would be more comfortable with a solid annexation policy in place, and that would make it a little better for me, but I come back to the same thing all the time with me, and I've had this argument in my head since February 4th, I believe, or whenever we first saw this up here, for a long time now, is I find myself being extremely lukewarm on this. I can't hate it, I can't love it, and I keep coming back to this thing in my head that we're doing something just to do something. And experience has taught me when we do that, we don't necessarily do the right thing. And maybe get something done, and it maybe is somewhat serviceable, but I really wish I had a strong feeling either way, and I just can't come up with that, and that's my personal dilemma. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Further comments on the original motion? Before we vote, however this is going to go, I just did have a suggestion for council as a friendly amendment, which I of course, cannot make, but in terms of the rear setbacks, currently it only requires a 20-foot landscape buffer when abutting residential and or agriculturally zoned properties. Given Emerald Heights is a residential neighborhood, I would personally like to see the rear setback, at least the landscape buffer portion, increased to a buffer that's, definitely more than 20 feet if there's any appetite for that from the council, just to protect those existing, residential uses in that area.
Hey, John, just a note that if you're speaking specifically to that lot that abuts Emerald Heights,
Yep.
it would be a side yard that would abut them, not a rear, because it's a corner lot, and it's the shorter of the two, it would become the front based on our code.
So the eastern property line's
Yeah,
considered the
that's a
side yard?
Yeah, I mean, if they subdivide it, that could change, but
So given that, it reads that it's a 10-foot setback with a 20-foot landscape buffer, correct?
that's correct.
So is that a total of 30 feet or a total of 20
No,
feet?
it's a 10-foot setback, but it'd be a 20-foot setback with, it had to be landscaped if it's abutting residential.
So
if
it's
you wanted to-
it's a 20-foot setback from property line.
Yeah, so if you wanted to increase that to 30 or 40 or whatever, that'd be the spot to do it. I mean, you'd probably do the side and the rear,
That's,
just
yep.
to cover it.
Do you have a recommendation on what that buffer width should be? And I imagine with these landscape, quote, buffers, that we would have the discretion to require landscape berms similar to what Kalispell required of Silverbrook, on South 93.
I mean, yeah, we don't have anything in our code about, berming necessarily.
I think there's a
Currently,
big
but-
difference between
But we-
buffering
but
when
we
you have
have-
berms versus when you don't have berms.
Right. Well,
And
we're,
how can we best affect that tool from a development standard perspective?
yeah, I mean, this might be an area where we could add a berming requirement. I mean, we don't really have a standard for that, and that's not something that we, looked at. I know that we're getting ready to update our landscaping code, and we have some additional setback language in there, and screening, and, what percentage of fencing that you can use, and how, all that kind of stuff when you're abutting different, uses that aren't compatible with each other.
Yeah,
But
my
all
point,
that
my
said-
point being that there's a big difference between the effectiveness of a buffer when you're dealing with bermed landscaping versus existing ground topography where they just, plant a bunch of trees and create a green strip.
Well, yeah, I mean, most of that, berming is on the highway. As you look at that map that I put on there, I mean, we have almost 300 feet wide of right-of-way there, and with another 50-foot buffer, there's going to be significant portions along the highway that are going to be, green space or undevelopable, or, maybe a bike path someday in there. But, Emerald Heights has an existing natural tree buffer, so if you added a berming requirement, you'd have to remove those trees and then berm it and then plant again, probably, but,
Not if the trees are on their property.
well, on the
The
Emerald Heights
developer would
property.
require to berm that corner property.
I'm just saying, an existing forest, it'd be hard to berm that without doing something to it, if it,
Of course, yeah.
yeah.
Steve?
Mr. Mayor, given Andy's comments and the fact that there's still a lot of confusion on this, I would feel more comfortable if we postpone this to a date uncertain, and I would wonder if Rebecca would be interested in withdrawing her motion to approve. I would hate to vote this down and then still have to come back to it. I mean, I think it's clear to me anyway, that we need to do something at some point. I think a lot of us are feeling the angst of this isn't exactly what we need to do right now. So,
I'll let Rebecca consider your request.
Okay, just to clarify, I would consider it, but what it sounds like is Andy would like to have the more clarification about when the annexation policy will be updated. So we need a work session on that. We might need to add language about buffering to preserve the neighborhoods better. And is there any other concerns that we can address in the future so that we actually make a decision on this?
well, there's the issue of the conditional uses that, since they're all conditional, maybe there are a couple that would be permitted.
Yep.
That
Yeah.
could be vetted.
The daycares and the home occupations and the
Public
public
buildings,
buildings? Okay, so, yeah, I would withdraw my motion as long as we come back to it, like, oh my
Is there a
gosh.
second to the?
I'm
is that
sorry,
okay with the
Dave, this
second?
has been.
It's okay with me. I'm advocating for making a different
So the motion has been withdrawn. I do encourage the council, if there is a motion for postponement so that we don't continue kicking this can down the road, that we actually set it to a date certain based on planning staff's availability to address some of the comments that were made this evening.
Do we have any sort of ballpark for our annexation policy? I mean, what I'm hearing is that having that in conjunction with this would ease some people's minds. At least it would ease mine. I think it would maybe ease Andy's. I don't want to speak for him, but that was what I heard.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could do it after after the first of the year. We just have to figure out when there's a work session that's got time to work through that.
And then how long would it take to get an annexation policy?
Well,
at the
it's
same
adopted by
time as this?
resolution by the council, but who knows
We'd have to go through planning
how much
board.
hand-wringing will be over that thing. It might take a few council meetings to adopt, but
But it would have to go through planning board as well, correct?
nope.
Annexation policy would not. Okay.
So I would suggest, if that's going to be the motion that you consider this evening, that I don't see Dana able to answer the question about our work session agendas, but it seems a reasonable time frame. Dave, would be February 6th, which would, give at least 4 or 5 council meetings between now and then before we consider this again.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could just set that date and hope that we could
Okay.
fit it in, and if not, we can always change that, or you guys can change that
Okay.
when we're ready.
Steve?
Okay, I would move that we postpone until, I didn't hear a certain date, would February?
6th.
February 6th, okay, sorry. That we postpone discussion of this until February 6th.
Is there a
Further-
second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to say that we still do have an annexation policy that allows us to not accept people that allows us to say no to annexing people into the city, whether there's a line of people waiting to get in or not, I don't know. But if they are there and we don't want to annex them, there's nothing that requires us to annex people at this point. So I do understand that if we do annex people, that the most likely zoning would be B2, RWB2, which is much more permissive than anything in this.
That's right.
But we do not have to annex people.
Further comments on the motion to postpone to February 6th? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry on a 5-1 vote, with Councilor Caltabiano voting in opposition. Thank you, Dave.
It's a zombie.
We will move on to item 6B of our agenda, which will be Resolution 22-35, adopting the 2022 Whitefish Community Housing Roadmap, and this appears on page 118 of your packet. Good evening, Wendy.
All right, good evening. So yes, before you is the 2022 Whitefish Community Housing Roadmap. This roadmap is an update of the next evolution of the Whitefish Strategic Housing Plan that you folks adopted back in 2017. So I'd like to introduce our 2 consultants that helped us with this project. Wendy Sullivan with WSW Consulting is online, and she also helped us with our 2016 and 2017 work. And then also Shauna Doherty is also online, and she is from Agnew Beck. So they will be leading the presentation and answering your questions.
So quickly, before we get started, I sent Michelle an updated PowerPoint, and I'm seeing that this is not the most recent version. So I'm wondering if we could pull up the most recent one.
I'm sorry, when did you send that most recent one?
About an hour ago.
Okay, that's probably why, because I was in a meeting, so let me
Yeah,
pull that
sorry
from
about that.
from my email, so just a moment.
Sienna, just curious how much time you're going to need for the presentation.
This is Wendy. I'm expecting, 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, thanks.
That work?
It sure does. Just was curious if we should take a quick break while Michelle pulls up the presentation. Go ahead and take a 5-minute break? Okay, thanks. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes.
Thanks, Michelle. Sorry about that last minute change.
Oh, no problem.
I'm also noticing that just Wendy Sullivan, just so you know, we're a little bit delayed. Is it sounding okay for all of you?
Yeah, we can hear you good.
Okay. Great, perfect, that's the one.
Okay. Sorry, I got into your computer. Work session.
Going to go ahead and call this meeting back to order, and we'll reconvene with item 6B of our agenda with the presentation from our consultants regarding the Whitefish Community Housing Roadmap. Thanks, Wendy.
And safe for the,
So do you want us to start, or is
Yes,
Wendy
please.
up and ring introducing us again? I'm sorry, you wanted us to start?
Yes, please, Wendy.
Yep, okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay, well, thank you. And yeah, thanks for the introduction and the attendance. I just wanted to say that, so I'm Wendy Sullivan. I am with WSW Consulting. And I feel very fortunate that I was able to come back to your community after 5 years from helping to work through the original housing needs assessment, and then also the strategic housing plan that you guys have been working on implementing over the past 5 years, to see not only the progress that's been made, but also the significant number of partners and community interests that has evolved since that time. And I think that was probably the most exciting thing, is just to see the engagement of the community around this issue. Now, I recognize, No as a consultant since COVID, coming in and doing this kind of work, especially housing needs assessments, it's depressing. And, for those of you that have read the housing needs assessment that we did as part of this plan, the numbers are quite daunting. And I think, what we're going to go through today will show that. However, on the flip side, it's also very mobilizing. So I think we're encouraged by what we've seen in terms of progress in the past 5 years, but also in terms of opportunities that are presenting themselves moving forward. And so that's really what we tried to capture, in going through this roadmap process. And so we will talk about this. And so I wanted to also introduce Shauna Doherty. She's with Agnew Back. She was not part of the process 5 years ago. However, I've been able to work with her in several other communities, and she really took the primary facilitation role throughout this process. So anyway, if Shauna wants to introduce herself quickly.
Yeah, good evening, council members and staff. We're excited to be here. I hate to say this, but this is also not that we're looking for the PowerPoint that has our 2 logos on the front. So you had the original one up that was correct, but the one that we're seeing.
There you go.
Nope, this is not the right PowerPoint. So sorry. I can keep going though while we're waiting for that.
Please do.
Okay. Well, I do need that first slide. So what I was gonna,
Just introduce yourself, Shauna.
Yes, I'm Shauna Doherty. I'm a senior manager with Agnew Back. I'm based in Truckee, California. I was the housing manager at the town of Truckee for 2 years and worked on several collaborative housing processes in Bozeman and in Ketchum, and was excited to work in Whitefish over the last 6 months with your Housing Refresh team and build off of the great work from 2017. And this is the first time that I've been working in a community where you had already done a housing action plan. And I think sometimes it is daunting to focus on all the things you haven't done. But I can tell you, for communities where I go into, we're just about to start work in Sandpoint, Idaho. And communities that have gone through the process of looking at their needs and creating roadmaps and starting the process of building their capacity to implement are so much further along than communities that are just starting out, trying to even think about who should be at the table and what are our needs and how do we build staff capacity and get our council to understand sort of where we need to go and get everyone flying in the same direction. So just, it's important to keep that in mind, that it is, even just listening to the conversation about growth in the last hour and listening to your conversations about those really challenging issues, just to celebrate the work that you have done so far is an important part of this process. So how are we doing on that PowerPoint?
Status quo.
Okay.
We're still working on it.
Is it possible for me to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I have to be made a meeting. It says only meeting organizers and presenters can share, so I'm not a presenter. I would keep talking, but I'm going to wait till we have some slides.
Sorry, Wendy, this was part, or Shauna, this was part of what I had emailed us about, so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I saw it up right before the break. I saw the right one up.
I'm sorry, so just bear with me, please.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Michelle. Yeah, I did see the right one up right before the break.
Dana, do you want to move on to the next agenda item and then we can circle back to this? We can cover the legislative updates for 2023.
That works for me.
Okay. We'll circle back with you, Wendy.
No,
Here.
there is the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Come on. I see it.
Okay, which page would you like me to be on?
The second slide with the roadmap, that one. So is there a way for us to be able to see that? I can just pull it up on my
I
computer.
thought you
and
said that you
speak
just
to
saw it.
I saw it on your screen.
Yeah, we can see it on your screen behind the council members, but we don't.
That's okay.
All I
yeah,
see is Shauna's face on my screen.
I can pull it up and just speak to it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just move forward with, I just pulled up my own presentation. So we're looking at the Whitefish housing process roadmap with all the circles and the blue and the yellow circles. Would you like me to move forward?
Please.
Okay. So this is the overview. Oh, sorry.
I see it now. Thank you.
Okay. So this is an overview of the process over the last 6 months. We started with a conversation about what's working in the 2017 plan and where there's still gaps. From that base, we looked at sort of how do we also expand the number of stakeholders that are involved in our planning process over this next 6 months so that we really make sure that we're bringing a wide range of opinions and expertise to the table. We named this group the Housing Refresh Team. And they were in addition to our Housing Strategic Committee that has been working diligently over the last few years to move the 2017 strategies forward. And then we formed that new team. And then we moved into doing a housing needs update that Wendy's going to talk about. I'm sure you've reviewed the housing assessment report that came out that is on the City of Whitefish website, community housing page. And from that, we used the data from the 2022 study to really look at which strategies do we want to move forward in our meeting number 2. So on the number 4 on this process map, we reviewed the data, we reviewed the results from 2017. We set our sort of our vision for this process. What kind of community are we trying to build here? What else is going on with different organizations? We looked at other communities. And then we went out and in July, we hosted a one-day community open house, multiple options for the community to provide feedback on the data. We did it both in person and online, summarized all of that and brought that to a third meeting with the Housing Refresh team, where we looked at updating the strategies and the priorities based on the input and the needs. We took that, we drafted a draft plan, then we met online again with the Refresh team to sort of go through those strategies, mostly around building that partnership framework. So who else is going to be at the table? Who's willing to take the lead? What do we want to get done? And then we're here tonight to present that final result with you for your approval. Next slide. Huge thank you to our Housing Refresh team. As you can see, a much larger set of partners at the table, willing to roll up their sleeves and really help us set the direction for addressing community housing in the community. So really exciting to see the growth of this roster from 2017 to today. And a huge thank you to that team that put the time and energy in. Next slide. I'm going to hand it over to Wendy, who's just going to give a high-level summary of the community housing needs assessment that was done.
Yeah, and so thanks, Shauna. So this bridge, we call it the housing bridge, really summarizes pretty much on one page what the results of the housing needs assessment were. The housing needs assessment itself takes a look at what the current market is providing in terms of housing, what residents and community members who are working in the community need in terms of housing at price points and different types of units, and then where those gaps are. And by looking at where the gaps are, that's really where, as you see highlighted on the bottom of this bridge, this core housing target, that highlights where your strategies and policies, additional funding, additional subsidies, incentives, or really need to target, be able to supplement what the market is able to provide for your community members. And so it's this housing target area that's really the focus of the strategies and the needs that came out of the roadmap process. An important thing to recognize is that this number of about 1,300 homes needed by 2030, there's a couple components to this. Number one, this identifies community housing needs only, which is defined as units needed at prices that people making their living in your community can afford. So it does not include demand from out of area buyers. So it would be investment buyers, second home owners, etc. This number is really focused on what your community needs to function and maintain and keep jobs filled, in essence. The second component is that the 1310 homes encompasses both what the market is providing and what would be needed below market. So about 75% of your units to serve your community housing, 1,300 homes, need to be priced to really meet the needs of your community. And so that, again, is important to understand for the focus of the strategies that are coming forward in this roadmap. And you'll see a big component of this funding, quite honestly, because producing units below market is takes money, and it takes a lot of incentives and creativity and partnerships to get. I can go into more detail on this bridge. In essence, what it shows is the spectrum of housing that would be needed at different price points by people that are living in your community. It's intended to represent the ability for people to come into your community, say on the left side and the red side, in a rental. You know, they get a job, they need to get into the community to begin with to take the job, right? So they have to rent something. And then the ability for them to grow in your community, to build a family, to, you know, get married, to have kids, to actually raise the family locally. So then you're starting to look, moving to the right of the bridge, to the green area. When I get into ownership, invest in your community, and then as their family grows, increase the size of their home. So move from the 1-bedroom condo up to a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom townhome, for example. And so and then when they become empty nesters, also having the ability to downsize in housing as they become retirees, they want lower maintenance, et cetera. So it's really trying to look at your community in this whole picture. What type of housing do you need for people to thrive and really make Whitefish their home? And in light of that, support your community. I think, unless there's a question, I think that's all I need to say here.
Any questions for Wendy? Not seeing any, Wendy.
Okay, next slide. Joanna?
So this next slide, we're going to dive right in. I know we're trying to make up some time, and you all got the roadmap in your packets. But really what we wanted to do is just highlight a few, the structure of this new plan and what's different than 2017. In 2017, you had essentially 3 partners at the table doing the heavy lifting. And what's really different about this particular plan is that when we assessed the 2017 plan and where you saw results and where there were gaps, really the gaps that we were seeing were really in the core components. And the core components are really sort of that engine that drives the strategies. It's the partnership framework, so putting resources and intention into ensuring that those partnership structures are strong and that you're working together and measuring your progress collectively on a regular basis and reporting that out to the community. At the end of the day, the community cares that there's more housing. They don't really care that much who's doing it. And so by working together, there's not one organization or one agency or one city that can take this challenge on by themselves. It needs a range of partners coming to the table with their particular expertise and resources to move this agenda forward. The second, so 2 things that are different than 2017 you'll see is just a bigger focus on core components, and secondly, really building that partnership framework. And then we built off of the priorities, priority strategies in 2017. We'll go to the next slide. And really, we just wanted to honor the work that many of you did to build that 2017 plan. So the brown section are the results of the strategies that were implemented. Again, going back to that's an important thing to celebrate. The lighter brown are the strategies that are in process. And then on the right side are the priorities that we moved over from the 2017 strategy list over into the 2022 priorities. So it truly is an update. And then the lighter green are the addition based on feedback. The blue is not that they're being ignored, they just didn't get traction and they might have been researched and not moved forward. If you could just go back, Michelle, so I could just quickly touch on, everything is built on this definition of community housing, where our refresh team and staff had quite a big input on this, which is housing not being provided by the existing housing market at prices attainable for community members that live and work in the Whitefish area. And that's why this is called Community Housing Roadmap. And as Wendy showed in the bridge, it's aiming to create strategies across the full spectrum. So next slide and the next one after that.
Great. And so a component in the roadmap are these objectives. And so, you know, Shauna talked about the need to track your progress over time. And these 4 objectives are really in here to help provide some measurable targets that you can use to track your progress and what you get done over time. These objectives in particular were carried over from 2017. They were brought forward as important components that were really seen as important to retaining the diversity and makeup in Whitefish. So for example, objective 1 is the owner-renter mix. You want to make sure that you have enough rentals in the mix in your community so they actually come to your community, take jobs before they get into ownership, kind of thing. This was taking a look at least wanting to retain what you had in 2010, which was 35% rentals and 65% ownership. Retain a good balance in your community. The second one was income targeting. Again, making sure if you that bridge, that highlighted core target area, making sure that you are providing housing at prices that people making their living in your community need. So for rental housing, this would be focusing efforts on households earning from 30% up to 100% of the area median income, which is just below where the market is providing. And then for ownership housing, focusing efforts on serving households with annual incomes between 70 up to 250% AMI. For reference, those are homes priced between about $170,000 a year up to over about $520,000 a year. Primary home, second home relationship. It is recognized that you guys have a substantial second home owner and visitation home usage in your community. About 70% of your homes are occupied full time. It was a goal to at least retain, if not improve, that occupancy rate of homes. And then objective 4 is jobs, housing, relationship, really taking a look and making sure that you are producing housing, price points, and the volume needed to keep your jobs filled, to maintain your keep up with job growth moving forward. And so that's where this 13 through 2030 came to play, at least 900 of which need to be priced below market. Next slide.
So we're going to dive now into the meat of the roadmap and just talk a little bit about the structure. So before I show you the entire, it'll be a slide that shows the entirety of the roadmap. It's important to start thinking, yes, tonight is about reviewing this and hopefully approving it, but really to start thinking about implementation. And so this next phase is going to talk both about the priority strategies, but also the timeline. When do you want to kick this work off? So yellow highlights the action phase of these strategies. And then there's 3 timeframes based on year 1, mid-range is year 2 to 3, and then longer range. This will move as you check the work off and meet on a regular basis in a partnership format to make adjustments, but it is helpful to see these priorities moving into sort of both time and then roles. And a little bit about roles. Lead role means that organization has committed to setting up staffing and hopefully resources to take the lead on that work. Support role means that you also, as an organization, are willing to delegate in your annual work plans staffing or resources. It doesn't mean that other partners can't show up and support that action, but the support role is truly should be reflected in each of the individual partners' annual plans. So next. This is a slide that's impossible to see on a PowerPoint, but you get the gist of how everything fits together. And this is an example of the base that will be used, hopefully, as you move forward and track the progress when all the partners come together and report on movement on these strategies. A critical thing here is not the meetings where you're reporting out on the progress, it's the work that happens in between the meetings. The quarterly meetings or the every other month or however you decide to meet as a partnership is really creates the accountability and it creates the roll up of the results to share with the public. But truly the work happens in between the meetings. Next slide. I'm just going to touch on the core components. I did mention it earlier, but you can see it's sort of the trunk of the tree of this roadmap. And so the brown section is this engine that's really critical to laying down the roots for this action to happen. We can't stress it enough. We've said it over and over, but the four core areas are, number one, creating this framework. You know, who's there, what are their roles, what are they agreeing to, who's the facilitator. Ideally, you have your partners contributing funds towards the collaboration effort, but you know, usually you have a lead like the city take it on, and then eventually I've seen communities have a community foundation or some other entity take on that role of convening. Staff capacity, critical that you don't just tack this work on to somebody else's, they already have a whole job, and you want to not just add this task onto an already full-time job. You want to identify, like you have with your housing coordinator, someone that can work on this. This includes not only at the city, but the group just agreed that having capacity at the critical key housing organizations, Housing Whitefish and the Whitefish Housing Authority will be key. Part of this is also clarifying roles. So what's the role of the partnership? What's the role of the Housing Steering Committee? What's the role, if you were to, one of the recommended actions is to support Whitefish Housing Authority through an MOU, which does two things. One is it provides critical funding to support a really important housing implementation organization. And then two, the MOU really clarifies roles. So for that funding, what services are they exactly going to provide? And then again, this was also in the 2017, we're going to bring it forward again, which is, you know, make sure that you're rolling up your results and not just once every 3 years or 4 years that you're bringing the community into this conversation, that you're constantly getting information out about the progress. Next slide.
So I'm going to talk through each of the 4 primary strategy areas for which actions have been identified within the plan. And the very first one I want to touch on, obviously, is the public-private development. This really lays out what the actions are and the priority strategies will be moving forward, and who's going to be in the lead for each, who's going to, and when it's going to happen. For public-private development, I really see this is potentially your most powerful tool for actually getting volume of community housing done. And the advantage of public developments too is that you're more able to hit some of those lower price points than what, say, incentivized market housing could hit. You're able to get down to the 80% AMI for ownership. You're able to get, you know, down to lower price points for rentals, etc. So I can't stress enough the importance of this one. And I know you've already been looking at this. You have projects in place already, which is great. And so anyway, this is really looking to build on existing momentum. So the very first is really overarches the other two, and it's to create a community housing development plan. So the objective of this is to really take a look at public and institutional lands and potentially private opportunities on which you can provide community housing and do housing projects, and then develop what you need to get it done. And so by creating a community housing development plan, the objective would be to set a 10-year goal for which parcels rise to the top, for what you're going to start developing, what partners do you need in place, what type of are they going to have, price points are you hoping to hit, and then where is your financing coming from, okay? The nice thing about having in place is that it can also help you in the future raise additional funds, additional partners, because you have something to show, okay? This incorporates or would incorporate activities from the other two actions. So one is looking at public-private institutional development partnerships, current primary opportunities. You already have an application in for the snow lot for some ownership townhomes coming in, which is great. So continue to work forward on that, assess as you learn more about the needs for that development. Trailview, which is current ownership project actually being developed by a private developer, but the majority of which is to be deed restricted for ownership for people making their living in their community. Continue to support what's needed to round out completion of that development. And then Alpenglow 2, which is really pairing off of the tax credit Alpenglow apartments that were built since the last study. And taking a look at the additional land there and what that development would be. Those are three that are pretty primed to go. The next action, priority action 3, is really to continue assessing what your pipeline will be. You know, there's always opportunities that open up. There's always lands that come into play that may not have been available before, et cetera. Continue to keep on what your priorities and next tier opportunities can be. And new partners may come to the table as well. So that's really kind of the nuts and bolts of this one. Next slide. So the other big category, and this one is big, is funding. Basically, when you look at financing community housing development, you have state funds potentially available, federal funds, and then local financing opportunities, okay? State and federal funds are limited in the AMI level that they can actually serve. They are typically limited to 80% median income or below. Some can go up to 120, but not many, okay? So when you look at where you need to go up potentially to 200% or 250% AMI, you're going to be needing financing as well that can impart more flexibility on what that income level is that you can serve and build for, okay? And so that's really what we're looking at is what is the whole range of financing opportunities we have available. So again, creating a community housing financing plan. Now, this financing plan needs to look not only at the first strategy area we just talked about, your development coming down the pipeline, but it also needs to look at where your financing is going to come from and how much you're going to need for the other strategy plan in the other category areas. If you're looking at a down payment assistance program, what's your financing plan? Where is it coming from? That kind of thing, okay? So it's all encompassing. This can really help lay out where your priorities then would be among these opportunities, okay? And so when you're looking at local sources, priority action 2, taxes is a significant source that most communities go to and need to go to. You have already approved an annual mill levy allocation, which is one of the other options on here to look at is your resort tax for housing, at least bringing it forward to allow those funds to be spent on housing, if not necessarily taking even more specific actions. And all of these actions are specified in more detail in the plan itself, so I'm not going to list them all. Priority action 3 is looking at federal and state grants and loans. There's a lot of new opportunities that came down the pipeline. Part of the new staffing positions at Housing Whitefish and Whitefish Housing Authority would add staff capacity to research and go after more of these financing options. Priority action 4, private donations and philanthropy, really try more into the strengths that you already have in your community. The Whitefish Community Foundation had helped to fund a renter assistance program during COVID. Has been active in some other aspects of housing, trying to build on that, and some of the new organizations in your community with Housing Whitefish and Shelter Whitefish and the school district all providing opportunities to potentially raise some funds. Action 5, voluntary funds. So the Whitefish Chamber, you guys have a tourism tax that's been successful, trying to build on that model for housing. Northwest Montana Realtors Association is actually looking at and on creating a voluntary fund so that realtors and sellers can contribute to housing for the community. So trying to tap into those options. And then debt financing with favorable terms is the final action. As interest rates, as we know, increasing in the community, really trying to look at opportunities to assist developers to have lower. There's several things listed in this plan that the city can do, but also working with local banks, Community Reinvestment Act funds, et cetera, to help with some of this. Next slide. The fourth strategy area is focuses on policies. And these policies are really intended to try to do what they can to make it easier to incentivize more community housing to be produced in your community, and also help preserve some of what already exists. So priority action 1 is updating the growth policy, which already have in place or already are acting on. And that's really to take a comprehensive look at, integrating transportation and infrastructure and where it should happen, and then how your zoning should be affected as a result. And so several recommendations listed under that one for best practice considerations as you move forward. Short-term rental regulations, this is really looking at beef enforcement of your current regulations. You already just restrict them to certain zones, but then enforcing those that are outside the zones. And then based on that, understanding whether or not there's changes or tweaks that might need to happen or should happen to make it more effective. Annexation policy. So this was a big discussion before we came on, but taking a look in your annexation policy, the ability to have community housing as a requirement, or the ability to get community housing as part of an annexation agreement. This is potentially a strong policy to ensure community housing in your community. An incentive package for community housing. Again, we list several in there. Some of them also pair with some of the things coming down from the state, which I'm sure you're all aware of. But again, trying to increase, provide more incentives, such as like your density bonus program that you have in place. You've already put in some incentives for accessory dwelling units, building on that, but then providing additional incentives to help developers help you produce community housing, okay? Zoning for affordability and flexible forms, again, is, just looking at your codes and different types of units that you might need in your community, bringing in ability, for example, if you see tiny homes as being part of the need, ensuring that all of your codes allow that, your architectural, your building codes, et cetera, and making sure they're all. No net loss and preservation regulations is really looking at preserving what you have. For example, you have a current hotel development for which 20 apartment units are being lost. No net loss at trying to replace those units or prevent that loss. Okay. Deed restriction is really just a deed restriction that is less intensive than the one you already have. So it basically would be just requiring that the buyer or occupant work and live in the community. It wouldn't necessarily have income or price restrictions. It's been effective in several other communities, such as Jackson, to list one. And so there's more deep. And then the legislative lobby group. Again, this is especially on at the state level, getting a group together in partnership with honestly other communities that are also active at that level to try to increase your voice for helpful community housing policies at the state level. Next slide. And then finally, programs are basically, well, just that, programs to help get people into housing. And so, and or keep their housing. And so part of it is looking at short-term rental, second home conversion, trying to convert those units into long-term occupancy. Another one is home buyer assistance, trying to help people buy homes and get into homes. It can also help with community housing and getting people into those units. Acquisition of deed restrictions on market units, which basically is just trying to take your existing stock and ensure in the future that they will be occupied by community housing, by people making their living in the community. Tenant rent assistance, protections, and education, the amount of the public input that we got. I know there's a lot of state limitations on that, trying to look at least at education and other efforts to provide additional protections for tenants. And then employer and partnerships, which is really trying the current momentum that employers are already doing in your community. Next slide.
This is the last slide that just summarizes the next steps with this phase of the work. Tonight is obviously the presentation to you. And then staff can speak to what happens next as far as I'm going to hand that over to Dana, who can speak to sort of the immediate next steps related to this. And I think this is also the time to open it up for questions or any comments from staff or the Refresh team.
Thank you, Shauna. So this evening, obviously, you're considering an adoption of this plan. And we have asked our Refresh team members to also take this plan to their boards for consideration of adoption as well. I've been invited to attend a meeting with the school district next Tuesday as they're presenting the plan as well to their board. And at the city, obviously, we are continuing to work on our action items. When you look at the core components, it is primarily related to increasing capacity at the city, and we are currently hiring for the housing coordinator position. We will also be looking at the structure of the current strategic housing plan steering committee, as that committee is scheduled to sunset at the end of December. But through this plan, there are some recommended changes. And we also will continue to take the lead on the establishment of the partnership framework, where we will look to be meeting quarterly or every 2 months to meet with our community partners to continue moving forward with these housing strategies. So with that, I know we have a couple members from the Refresh team here that I'd like to give the opportunity to share your experience on the team and anything that you've done to date. So Katie?
Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Shauna. 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 Thank you,
Careful.
Good evening, everyone. Katie Williams for, do I have to give my address? Yeah, Katie Williams.
We know where you live.
I'm wearing three hats today. I had the honor of being one of the members of the Housing Refresh team, but I'm also wearing the hat as a board member of the Whitefish Housing Authority and board chair for Housing Whitefish. Both boards asked me to prepare a brief statement, and I will keep it brief because I'm sure everyone's eyes are glazing over. But long story short, Housing Whitefish would like to thank the City of Whitefish for facilitating the 2022 Housing Refresh and for bringing many community actors together to help draft accelerated solutions for community housing in Whitefish. Housing Whitefish is committed to adopt and embark on the next steps outlined in the plan, starting first by working with the City of Whitefish not only to establish the partnership framework, but also develop the community housing development plan, which is outlined as which are both outlined as core components and priority actions respectively. We can already check a few things off that list that we had presented. Daniel, shout out to Daniel, he is actually online, is our new Executive Director of Housing Whitefish, whose position has been initially funded by generous grants from Explore Whitefish's Community Sustainability Fund, the Whitefish Community Foundation, and Mark and Robin Jones. His position is slated to begin in December, and the Housing Whitefish Board has identified the priority for the new executive director to start working with the city to help continue the momentum achieved by the Whitefish Community Housing Roadmap as soon as both partners are able. Now switching hats to the Whitefish Housing Authority. On behalf of the Whitefish Housing Authority Board, we would also like to echo the support of the Community Housing Roadmap and its priorities, steps, and solutions outlined in the document. You will see before you in your council agenda, as was mentioned earlier, the snow lot, which has been, 7 years almost in the making, 6 years in the making. It will be before you on the December 5th meeting. And the Whitefish Housing Authority is excited to work with the city and other partners such as Housing Whitefish to help facilitate effective community housing programs and unit management. Thank you for your time. I'm here if you guys have any questions. And we appreciate your support. Now let's get some things actually going.
Thanks, Katie. Appreciate all your work on this.
And I think at that point, we can turn it back to you for the public hearing.
That sounds good. We did advertise for a public hearing on item 6B of our agenda, which is resolution number 22-35, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Any public comment this evening?
My watch told me that I should start getting ready for bed like 15 minutes ago, so I'm going to try. Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue, President of Shelter WF. Thank you all for initiating and completing this process. The data in this report, I think, is incredibly valuable as we move forward to plan Whitefish's housing future. I want to say thanks also to all the volunteers and community members who sat in the committee meetings and participated along the way. I first want to point out a few things in the report that I really like. First, Shelter WF is mentioned countless times in the report, and that's pretty cool, I think, for an organization that we formed in April to give a more representative slice of the community a voice in housing decisions. The report really lays bare the problems that we have and provides some good solutions, like implementing a communications and outreach plan to better educate the community on housing topics, taxes dedicated to community housing, zoning for affordability and flexible forms, and tenant protections. I do have some concerns about how this roadmap will be used in the future when a development is proposed and a public hearing takes place in this room, not necessarily by you, but by people that read it. The report states that 75% or 975 homes in Whitefish built by 2030 need to be priced below the market rate. While this is aspirational and a good goal, here's something to maybe keep in mind. We had someone run some numbers for us based on a real-world development model. And this is what it showed. The most economical type of building was an eightplex, cost about $331,527,680. It's a lot of dollars. To build 122 of them to cover our community housing needs by 2030. And that's ignoring land costs. So that's about $47 million every year just to cover construction. Let's say that model's crazy, cut that number in half, it's still a whole lot of money. Now, there might be a few millionaires or a billionaire that can help us get there, but if history is any indication, then we probably shouldn't count on it. That being said, if there happen to be a few millionaires or a billionaire watching this, feel free to prove me wrong and I'll stop bringing it up all the time. There will continue to be housing proposals that come forward in Whitefish, begging to use the leverage for affordable housing that Whitefish has created. Many of these proposals will build 10 to 30% of their homes as deed-restricted affordable for our community members. I just have one simple thing to ask of all of you. Please don't let this plan prevent you from incrementally chipping away at our affordable housing crisis in favor of, instead of a near impossible to achieve ideal that ultimately results in strictly market rate development that does not benefit our community. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Further public testimony this evening. Michelle, anyone online? Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion, preferably. Ben.
I'll move to adopt Resolution 2235, a resolution adopting the 2022 Whitefish Community Housing Roadmap.
Thank you, Ben. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Cornell. Ben, would you like to address your motion?
I will, since I've worked on housing in various capacities over the years. You know, it's a cyclical industry, and, you know, when we started working on this back in 2017, the world was a pretty different place. And in the intervening 5 years, the problem has gotten worse and worse for the community, and the difficulty of finding solutions that work has gotten higher and higher. It's a very, very tough problem. Nevertheless, it is one that I think is, in broad agreement, is a very significant issue for the members of our community. Now, when we looked at this before, in the original housing plan, you know, this one breaks it down. It's got core components, it's got public-private development funding, which I kind of see as related, and then it's got policies, which would be zoning-type policies, and then housing programs. When we did this first time, we started with number 3, really, which is zoning policy. You know, we went after inclusionary zoning and some of those things to help trigger the private sector to build the housing for us. And we lost the capacity to do a lot of that through the legislature, and that was a big setback. So looking back, now it's not surprising to me that more towards the top of the list, we have public-private development and funding, which is, again, related. As Nathan mentioned here, this is a harder road to go down. I mean, you look at the 1,300 units that we need to build, and you start doing math about how much funding we need to build those, because the price points, as are pointed out in this document, are unable to be obtained by the private sector. So that's a hard road to go. Now, you know, it's a cyclical industry again, so things will change in the next 5 years, and we'll see, you know, how this plays out. But I think the key here that we're doing, and what we need to hold ourselves accountable to, is we're setting up a system. I like the fact that the core components are at the top of the list. We need to set up, we need to have people that work on housing Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Right now, we have almost nobody that does that. And that's been, being self-reflective about our response in the last 5 years, I think that's been a major hindrance to us. But what we're doing is we want to set up a system. Number one, we want to build this, this, and this. It's going to cost this many dollars. Number 2, we need to fund these dollars. We're going to fund them by this, by this, by this. And we start it, we get the funds in, we start building things, we get more funds. There's a lot of people in this town that are willing to contribute to this problem. And I think a lot of it's building the capacity to make a difference over time, because I think you have to have a very long time horizon on this. And I also think you can't lose track of number 3 and 4 as well, which are the, I would call it the private sector options, updating the growth policy, annexation policies, ways of triggering development to make a difference in our town. And so anyway, I think I can quibble about a few little details in here, but at the end of the day, I think the general path is the right path. And I think there's a lot more people involved with the partners. You know, it used to be the chamber and the city and housing authority, and now we have Housing Whitefish. You know, the foundation really needs to be more involved, in my opinion, and other partners. And so I think the framework makes sense. I think the overall analysis of where we need to go is correct. I don't think it's easy. I do think that we will be, if we're doing this correctly, it's something that we will have to talk about constantly for the rest of our lives, because we can't just think about it when the problem's really bad. Right now, the problem's really bad. And if the market goes down, we still need to work on this. And so I think we want to set up some institutions that are going to be around and here forever, and over time can hopefully make a dent in the problem. So anyway, that's my analysis of this. I think it's a good path forward, and I look forward to helping if I can. So.
Thank you, Ben. Further comments on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. Shauna and Wendy, thanks for joining us this evening and for your work on this important step forward.
Great. Well, thank you, and we look forward to seeing your progress.
Stay tuned.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Good
you.
luck, everyone. All
Good
right.
night.
Take care.
Thanks for joining
Bye.
us. We will move on to item 6C of our agenda, which is Resolution 22-36, adopting legislative priorities for the 2023 Montana legislative session. Dana.
Great, thank you. My staff report is on page 215 of the packet. As you know, the 68th State of Montana legislative session is scheduled to begin January 2nd, and it will run through May 10th. That is the 90th legislative day. As we had met in October on the 3rd on a work session, you had reviewed the proposed list of priorities and provided feedback with a couple minor changes. And so we have brought forward a resolution to adopt the legislative priorities. This will help set a clear and united platform for staff, council, and our future consultant to understand what the city's perspective is on legislative items and what our priorities are. So we do have within the budget $20,000 budgeted to contract with a firm. I have a proposal from Turner Strategies. They're out of Missoula and came at the recommendation of Missoula and Bozeman's lobbyists. And so we are reviewing that internally, and we'll bring that forward, a contract proposal forward to council, hopefully at the next meeting. And with that, the Montana League of Cities and Towns did adopt their legislative goals and positions, which I included in the packet for your review, should you want to add any. But we kept ours more broad and a big picture, as we don't know what type of bills will be brought forward during the legislative session at this point, although there are bills being drafted as we speak. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but staff respectfully recommends that the City Council adopt the proposed resolution adopting legislative priorities for the 2023 Montana legislative session.
Thanks, Dana. Any questions for Dana on the staff report or priorities? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be our own ordinance 22-36, adopting legislative priorities for the 2023 Montana legislative session. We'll hold that public hearing now. Any public testimony tonight? Michelle, how about anyone online?
Dylan, did you want to speak towards this public hearing? Nope.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council. Steve.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 22-36, a resolution adopting legislative priorities for the 2023 Montana legislative session.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. That motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, Dana. You have Dana's report enclosed with the packet. Any questions on Dana's manager's report? Rebecca.
It wasn't on your report, Dana, but I'm just wondering, are we all done with the bear proofing container rollout?
Thanks for asking, Rebecca. We are not yet. We are still waiting on the manufacturer to deliver additional carts to Republic Services. The planned schedule will be that all carts will be delivered by middle of January. Yep.
Further questions? Dana, anything additional to report on?
I will just give you a brief update on our impact fee audit that has been completed, and we have sent out letters to property owners that may have been affected by the audit. There are 2 different letters that would be going out, those that we've determined are potentially due a refund and those that are not due a refund. And with the potentially due refunds, they are to submit back a letter and schedule an appointment for an on-site inspection to have our staff go and count fixture units to ensure that what building plans we had and what was actually built matches. So that is moving forward, and it's been a lot of work, and I want to thank all of our staff. Rose Elliott in our utilities department has been working tirelessly on that. Kenny in our legal department, she's helped us get those letters out. So it's been a huge team effort and a lot of work, but we are making progress there.
Great, thanks, Dana. We'll move on to item 8A, consideration of appointing to volunteer boards. I'll just briefly, we did make all of our appointments with the exception of the Climate Action Plan Standing Committee. Congrats to Ben Johnson, reappointed to the Whitefish Housing Authority, Toby Scott, Allison Linville, and Whitney Beckham to the Whitefish Planning Board, and finally Nia Malchik, to the Board of Park Commissioners. So congrats to our applicants and thanks to them for their volunteer service to our town. And with that said, Dana has made a request for us to consider canceling the second meeting in December, which would be on December 19th, about 6 days in advance of Christmas. However, in our work session, we discussed holding that meeting and limiting it to items requiring just a second hearing, which would basically just encompass the snow lot, which would be on a second reading for the December 19th meeting. So, excuse me?
Assuming it passes.
Assuming, exactly. So if that's the council's direction, I would entertain a motion.
I would move that we hold the second December meeting for only those items that require action before the first of the year,
On a second hearing.
on a second hearing.
Okay, is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And why don't we start on the left tonight? Andy, any comments to close out the evening?
Just kind of one comment going back to sustainability and the climate action plan, because we had obviously a young man we interviewed tonight, and I just had seen a story on CNN this past couple days of another small community in France that's dismantling their ski lift because they haven't had snow for over 15 years. A lift that had been in existence since the 50s, I believe, and they're not alone. There's many, many small areas like that throughout the Alps, and they're all very, very aware of climate change, and while I'm not concerned that we're not going to open the ski hill, especially given the cold that we've had here, I think that is something that we all need to be cognizant of the fact that it could strike us at some point too, and so just encourage us to continue to do whatever we can as a community from a sustainability standpoint, us as a city, as an organization, and all of our citizens. So,
Thanks, Andy. Rebecca?
Yep, I just would like the community at large to think about how they could help with housing. We have an incentive program for building accessory dwelling units now. If you deed restrict for 5 years, we've changed some of the development standards. If you have an interest in building on your property and adding housing, it would be nice. We're at the point now where most of what we're going to have to do will be subsidized, meaning a lot of taxpayer money will be paying for housing to meet the needs of the people that work here and live here. And it does affect people's mental health to not have housing and also their safety. And so I think we can meet the challenge, but I want everybody to start thinking more about what they can do individually to help. And And the other thing I wanted to say is it's really fun to talk to you guys about things and try to figure things out. I mean, I really appreciate all of you. Just, it's a joy to be up here sometimes figuring out the hard stuff with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca. Ben?
I would make a quick comment on marijuana dispensaries. I'm not anti-dispensary at all. I heard the Crystal Winter shop on Central was going to turn into a dispensary, and I don't know if that's true or not. But I would make the observation that the number and location of dispensaries, particularly in downtown area, is significantly more than I had thought was possible underneath the regulations that we passed. And so it does seem to me that there are some loopholes or unintended consequences happening about where I had understood the dispensaries could be located and where they are being located. So I would just make the comment, if there was support or folks wanted to look at that particular loophole, if that's something we wanted to address, I would support it, and if other folks wanted to do so.
Is there general support to reevaluate our zoning ordinance related to dispensaries?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Dana, does that register with you? We can get that prioritized? Yep. Great, thanks. What's that? Of course, yeah. Thanks. Anything further, Ben? No. Thank you. Frank?
I would like to issue not a public apology, but to my friend Rebecca, my zeal in discussing our transitional zoning and what we could and couldn't do. Please, I know you didn't, but I want you to want everybody to make sure that I'm not opposed to the motion you made or your intentions or anything else, and I quite frankly agree with many of your arguments, so just wanted to let you know that. Thank you.
I accept that, Frank, but I was not offended, and I actually always appreciate your comments.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Steve?
Keeping with the thanks, we do have a big day coming up, Thursday, yes. So I just want to wish all of you up here and all of you out there happy Thanksgiving, and hope that you have some quiet time to contemplate the upcoming holiday season, and just take a break from what you do in life to enjoy whoever you are with this week. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Steve. Giuseppe, you good? Okay, thanks. Just two brief comments. We are still, Dana and I met this evening, and we are still trying to plan for a local retreat in January. It will be on a weekend day. It'll be just a day excursion to a local establishment, so we'll keep you posted on that, but we were thinking probably mid to later January after the new year for sure. So keep that on the radar. Maybe come prepared to the next meeting to discuss your schedule and potential dates. And then finally, in advance, well, that will be in advance of what we're planning, which will be the State of the City address in late February. So we hope that all of you can also attend that meeting, which will be held here in City Council chambers, covering the general health and condition and welfare of our great city. So with that said, Dana, anything additional to add from staff, council? We are adjourned. Thanks.